I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you my image quality breakdown of the Zeiss Loxia 25mm F2.4 Distagon lens. Now, if you're unfamiliar with my format, I release 3 segments typically on most lenses. So the first is my first look episode, and if you missed that on this lens, I recommend that you stop and take a look at that because it details all the different aspects of the build, the design, specifications, how it handles, and some of the feature set that is a part of it, and so it gives you some familiarity with that, and also look at some photos. In the second episode, which we're doing today, is where I go in detail and break down image quality, look at things like resolution and vignette and distortion. In this case, looking at Coma and bokeh quality, chromatic aberrations, all of those things we're going to take a look at today. And so join me as we jump in and we break down the details of the Loxia 25mm lens. Okay, let's start by taking a look at what you're going to see when an image is imported here, as far as what remains after, kind of automatic profile correction, which is, if not completely embedded in the Batis or the Loxia series, what it is at least tagged, and so it's automatically applied when you come into Lightroom. So my point is that whether you're shooting JPEGs or RAWs, you're going to get this degree of correction. What we can see is there is a very mild amount of a barrel distortion that is still there. You can just see there's a very, very, very slight bulge or curve there. Not significant though. It doesn't appear to be a mustache type pattern. And so in other words, unless you're shooting brick walls, probably not a big deal at all. It seems like the actual vignette is pretty much perfectly corrected, so nothing to complain about there. Center sharpness and resolution contrast, as we're going to see, is really quite fantastic. I mean, lots of detail there, good degrees of contrast and micro contrast. As we move off towards the side, you can see that towards the end, while you still have good resolution, and there is a little bit of a loss of contrast, and resolution isn't as strong in the edges as it is in the center. However, what we do have is a pretty fairly even sharpness profile, in that there's not a huge drop off anywhere, and so you definitely have resolution across the whole frame. So if we compare f2.8 to f2.4, you see a little bit of a brighter image. This is, of course, we're not talking about a full stop here. It's a little over a third. I mean, f2.4 is a little bit of an odd aperture value, so the actual third stop is f2.5. And so anyway, so we have a little over a stop, or excuse me, a little over a third of a stop here. But what we can see is there's a little bit of an uptick in contrast in the center of the frame. There wasn't a whole lot needed, and so we don't really see necessarily more resolution, but what we do see is a little bit more contrast. Now, what's more interesting is if we look out at the side, and that's where more of an uptick is needed. And we see that there is a little bit. Let's take a look down into this corner. You can see that there's a little bit more kind of contrast going into there, a little bit more resolution, but it's not huge here. And so at the moment, what we've got is a good, not necessarily great performance even at f2.8. If we stop on down to f4 here in that extreme upper corner, we see that now resolution has improved somewhat, and so we're now getting to good levels. But obviously, if you come back to here, for example, it's not quite as strong in the corner, and so we've got very good here, we've got great throughout the rest of the frame. If we take it on down to f5.6 here in this upper corner, we see that, I don't think that in a real world there's enough of a difference for you to see there. I mean, resolution looks strong now right into the corners, but it's only ever so mildly better than f4. So f4, f5.6, f8, any of those apertures are going to deliver very strong landscape performance. It's taking Loxia lenses out into the real world where they really shine, however. There's just something very special about the micro contrast and the color rendering of any of the Loxia lenses, and that's very true of the 25mm f2.4. This is f5.6, and as you can see, I mean, the real world micro contrast is just fantastic, and the color, I mean, is just gorgeous. And so as you see, the draw depth looks great. I mean, look at the top of this ridge. You can see the saguaro cacti along the top of the ridge, showing up there. Just really fantastic. And here, if we come down into the foreground, into this front corner, we see, I mean, look at that. Resolution just looks fantastic. This is on a 42 megapixel Sony A7R Mark III. Look at the contrast here, mid-frame, but right at the edge. I mean, that is really, really stunningly good performance. And so anywhere that you want to take a look at here, it really looks fantastic. It just handles, Loxia lenses just seem to handle, the details really well, and that's part of what makes them special. Here's another early morning example in Scottsdale, Arizona, and so this is going up into the foothills. So, I mean, we've got some walkers in front of us. You look at how, again, just really great contrast here, and then as you look beyond them, as you start to go into the draw depth into the future, I mean, everything looks really great. I mean, it looks like we've got a little plane up here. I mean, but all of the details here, wherever you click across the frame, it looks fabulous. And that's what makes these lenses special. Back at home, in snowy scenes is a great place to test for aberrations, chromatic aberrations of the longitudinal or lateral variety. And so here we can see, looking in the snow, these kind of really high contrast points with footprints in snow. No problems there, great detail. Looking off here towards this tree, I mean, look in all these high contrast areas here. We can see aberrations are really well controlled. And because we're right off at the edge here, we can see that also lateral chromatic aberrations are well controlled. Up in here, I can see the mildest amount of purple fringing as we head up into this corner here. And so, you could correct for that, but really aberrations, across this image look very good. Now, when you're shooting even at wide apertures, for more kind of conventional shooting, we can see here that, details, skin tones, I mean, color rendition is such a strength for all of the Loxia lenses, and we can just see that here in a real world shot, it looks great, even though this is a wider angle and only moderately wide maximum aperture, we can see that, our transition towards our out of focus area looks quite good here as well. This is actually a shot from around Christmas time of my dad and one of my nephews here. And so once again, skin tones, real world detail, F2.4 looks great. And of course, even though they actually were moving, my dad was driving his electric cart, giving my nephew a ride here. It's really not all that hard to nail manual focus with the Loxia lenses. They handle really super well. And, being able to quickly magnify the image when you start to focus allows you to nail focus in, a surprisingly wide variety of situations. Now, looking at flare resistance here, this is wide open F2.4, and so we can see there's a little bit of veiling that is here near the epicenter of the sun, but not a whole lot of ghosting artifacts. If we stop on down, here we'll go all the way to F11. You can see that you start to see a really clearly defined sunburst effect. But what you're also not really seeing a whole lot of is additional ghosting artifacts. And so that's certainly promising there. Here's another example here. And here it's very, very bright sun, bouncing off snow here. What I see is I've got a little bit of a, I don't know if there was a speck of snow or something. I've got what looks like a kind of a bokeh type thing, but not a whole lot going on in terms of ghosting. I've got a little tiny artifact here, a little bit of a prismatic hazing near the epicenter of the sun, but we also have that really long bladed sunburst. Now, I like this kind of image better where I have a chance to kind of hide the light source a little bit and thus kind of limit the length of those blades. But you can clearly see the 10-bladed aperture, and so an even amount of blades, and so you have a very symmetrical sun star or sunburst effect coming off that. You can also note here, however, the contrast is held up really well, as we saw in the previous images. Here I just wanted to show you more of a typical real-world image, and so obviously all of these cholla cactus, catching lots of light, so a very strongly backlit scene. you know, bright Arizona sun, and it doesn't get much brighter than in Arizona. This is about the only ghosting artifact that I could see, so I give the Loxia 25 a really high rating for flare resistance. Very, very good. Now, as I noted previously, color rendering, of course, is really fantastic, and so just give you a look at a few images here as we go. You know, great looking images here, and just again, so much detail throughout these scenes. And so if we look down here in this foreground, you know, we're shooting at a little bit higher ISO here, and I've actually raised the shadows a little bit, you know, because I'm exposing more for the sky and the sunset. But even in the raised shadow, you can see that there's lots of detail there. And then as we look towards the distance, Camelback Mountain in the Phoenix area, everything looks really great. But looking at the image globally, the color is just fantastic. And of course, you could go into post and you could make that pop even more if you so desired. Here's another example here. Just, you know, there's something special about Loxia color. It's just, if you're someone that doesn't really like to do a lot of post-processing, the Loxia series may be very attractive to you for this reason. I mean, images just kind of come out of the camera looking really, really great, and just a, you know, richly saturated, but not kind of garish or overdone, still natural looking, but just fantastic. Now, the Loxia 25 doesn't have an amazing magnification ratio. You can focus down fairly close and get a 0.156 times magnification, which is useful, but certainly not amazing. What does stand out, though, of course, is that great color and, of course, the micro contrast of the lens. And so what we can see here is that, you know, low chromatic aberrations, all of that makes for a, you know, pleasing images here if you're shooting near minimum focus. You know, here, this one really kind of stood out to me because if you look at the actual subject, look how rich the detail is, and of course, really, really crisp edges. You can see a little bit of longitudinal chromatic aberration here, a little bit of green fringing, a little bit of purple fringing, but tremendous amounts of micro contrast. And so I'm really impressed by the amount of detail in these leaves, but then also the really rich color of them. And so, I mean, again, color rendition is certainly a really great strength. Here's, you know, one more kind of close focus, and this will give us a chance to look at the bokeh a little bit more. But here on the subject, you know, really good contrast. Looking at the bokeh, it is, you know, it's only a moderately wide maximum aperture, and, you know, it's a moderately wide focal length as well. So you're not going to get a huge amount of defocus, but what's here looks pretty decent, not too busy, so no major problems there. Here's another example here. Once again, the great flare resistance allows this image to be pulled off well. Obviously a really, really strongly backlit scene, but what we see is on the bagel here, just really, really great detail, micro contrast on the details. And then looking towards our out of focus, you can see we've stopped down a little bit here. You can see the shape of the blades, 10 blades here. But looking at the scene at large, you know, we've bled off to our defocus region pretty nicely here. Finally, let's wrap it up with a look at night sky and Coma performance. And so, first of all, I mean, a great focal length, a little bit wider than f2.8 maximum aperture is certainly useful. What we can see is we've got crisp star points here, and as we move off towards the edge, we have almost no instance of Coma at all. It's really, really well controlled. Even at f2.4 here, you can see a little tiny bit here in these edges, but really quite a strong performance. And so, of course, stepping back, lots of star points picked up, and a really nice looking final image. If we stop on down to f2.8, what we're going to see is there's a little bit more crispness to maybe some of those star points moving off in the corner. We didn't see a lot of Coma on that side. This is the only place we saw much of anything. And what you can see is what little bit was there is basically all reduced. And so at f2.8, you've got pretty much a Coma-less performance here. And so, you know, nice job. Certainly a nice lens for Astro if you pick it up. So as you can see, I'm pretty happy with the image quality from the Loxia 25mm F2.4. I think for me, the standout of the Loxia series has been the really, really fantastic combination of color and contrast that makes images just really have a, that extra little bit of specialness to them. If you're someone who doesn't really want to do a lot of post-processing, the great thing about images out of the Loxia lenses is that they come out with they look really good right out of the camera. Now, of course, you can always, tweak things to your own personal taste, add a filter or whatever. But if you're just looking for great looking images out of the box and you don't want to spend a lot of time with post-processing, Loxia lenses certainly have a lot of attraction when it comes to that. The other thing that, of course, makes that fantastic is that if you are someone who does video work as well, I mean, you're not only getting a lens that's designed with video in mind, which, if you're a video shooter, you know that is rarely the case. But beyond that, you've also got a lens that really does produce just a fantastic looking image quality right out of the box. And so again, even if you're doing video work, there's less editing work to do as a part of that. So all in all, I mean, there certainly are, liabilities to using a manual focus lens, particularly for stills work. But the trade-off with the Loxia series is you've got these beautifully compact lenses that handle really great, but also delivers some pretty special image quality. Even though, on paper, a 25mm lens with a maximum aperture of f2.4 doesn't sound particularly special, but the end results are more special than that suggests. If you'll look in the description down below, I do have a linkage to my image gallery with more photos there that you can take a look at and kind of get a further sense of the lens for yourself. There's also buying links if you're interested in purchasing one of these for yourself. There's also linkage there if you'd like to follow me on social media, including now on Instagram. You can become a patron, and on that note, a new policy that I have for my patrons is that I'm giving them sneak previews of upcoming content, and so they get a first look at things that have not yet been released to the public. And so just a little added benefit for being a supporter there. And of course, you can also sign up for my newsletter and stay tuned for all of the new reviews and also giveaways, things like that. And of course, if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button right here on YouTube. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.